Good morning everyone. Thanks very much for the invite along. I'm Matthew Jackson, I'm the Associate Director of the Centre for Local Economic Strategies, CLES. We're the UK's leading think tank dedicated to economic development and regeneration activity across the UK. I want to talk about some of our research work around public procurement that we've been undertaking probably over the last 6 years. And it kind of links into quite a lot of what Justin said, but I want to talk through some of the more practical things that local authorities and other public sector bodies can do in terms of experimenting with their procurement practices. I think procurement is increasingly important in terms of how our places function. And it links intrinsically into how we at CLES think about place. Place is about relationships. It's about relationships between the public, the commercial and the social sector within a locality. And public procurement, I think, is key to enabling those relationships to function and flourish within a locality. You may ask why, as an economic development organisation, we got involved in procurement research, and I think there's three reasons for this, really. First, the scale of the spend. Central government spends about £240 billion a year buying goods and services. Local authorities spend about £80 billion a year buying goods and services. At the stage when we started undertaking this work, we didn't really understand or have a knowledge of where that spend was going, what knock-on consequences and benefit it was bringing for local economies and for local places. So we want to try and understand that. Second, there's a heck of a lot of kind of myths around public procurement in terms of what you can and you can't do within the remit of European procurement law, particularly around local economic benefit. We've always been of the opinion that there are things that you can do by kind of changing the cultures and the thinking and mindsets of public sector procurers in particular, but also through developing some of those relationships that exist between the commercial sector and the voluntary community sector as well. Third reason for starting work around this was we think there's an intrinsic link between procurement and local economic development. If you procure well, you're going to bring benefits in terms of jobs, you're going to bring benefits in terms of apprenticeships, you're going to bring benefits in terms of business development and sustainability. So we felt that public authorities doing procurement better would bring a whole host of benefits for economies, and that kind of relates into a lot of stuff that Enfield Council was saying earlier. So our work's focused on three things. One, gathering evidence, where spend's going. I'll talk a little bit more detail about a survey that we did of every local authority in the country around procurement spend a little bit later on. Two, we've tried to shift the culture of the procurement officer within local government so that procurement effectively becomes a corporate function, a joined up function that sits across local authority activities. Previously we felt that procurement officers sat in dark rooms downstairs somewhere making decisions on the basis of cost, whereas we felt there was a much greater need for engagement across procurement, economic development, children's services, adult social care, so a raft of benefits could be achieved through the process. And then third, I think what we really want to do is influence the behaviour of the supply chain. Procurement is just one part of the process, service delivery is the next. We want to deliver a string of benefits through that £80 billion spend that local authorities have. So what we've tried to do is influence the thinking of supply chain organisations to deliver goods and services beyond that actual service provision, so it brings a raft of benefits. Justin kind of alluded to local multiplier 3, and this is where we started our work about 6 years ago. We stole this, like all good research people do, we stole it from the New Economics Foundation, who had used multiplier 3 to understand the impact of regeneration programmes at a local level. We wanted to expand this methodology to think about the totality of public sector spend within place. So thinking through of that £80 billion, what happened to it? How did it circulate within a particular local economy or space? So we started this work in Swindon with their commercial services department. The budget is £64 million. We wanted to understand the proportion of local suppliers that they had, the proportion of local employees that they had, how their suppliers respent back in the Swindon economy, and how their employees respent back in local shops and local services. So at the end of it, we had a figure for every pound that the authority spent on that provision, X was being spent and respent back in Swindon. The multiplier effect was 1.64. So that kind of research gives you a nice kind of figure, a nice promotional figure, an understanding of where the procurement spend is going. But we wanted to go a little bit further, which is why In about 2009, we started working with Manchester City Council around their procurement processes and their procurement practices. At this stage, in 2009, the City Council had a budget of about £900 million to spend on procurement activities. And they didn't really have an understanding of where that money was going or what impact it was having upon place. They've got aspirations to develop a sustainable procurement strategy, which was linked to kind of wider local economic and social outcomes, but the follow-through of that through the council and through the supply chain was not really being maximised. So we did those first two rounds of LM3 where we looked at where spend was going, and we found that of £357 million of spend, roughly about half was sticking in the Manchester economy, which is pretty good. I mentioned the work before that we've done with the Federation of Small Businesses. The national figures are around about 31.1% of spend sticking in local economy. So Manchester were doing all right. We also looked at where spend was going in terms of areas of deprivation and particular awards, because I think procurement's a virtuous cycle. You know, if you're spending money in a particular award, you want those suppliers and those employees that you're spending that money with to have some sort of kind of commitment, some sort of engagement to that award in terms of kind of how they spend on their own supply chains and how they spend in terms of local shops and local services. So we found that 43 million of that 357 million was actually going into Ardwick, which is one of the most kind of deprived wards within the city of Manchester. What impact was that having upon the place? What was that supplier organisation and organisation doing with that resource in terms of kind of maximising benefit for the Manchester economy? We found that in total about £87 million was going into areas of deprivation, areas with kind of low levels of jobs, low levels of skills, poor business development, poor business sustainability. So there's significant resource going into the localities. We did a survey trying to find out how suppliers really spent back in the Manchester economy. 25p in every pound received by a supplier was really spent back in Manchester upon employees and suppliers of their own. The most important bit of this work, though, was to try and understand the ethos of the supply chain. So we wanted to try and understand the ethos of key organisations providing goods and services to the council when it came to employment, when it came to their own supply choices, when it came to environmental choices. And we came up with a kind of whole host of activities that were being undertaken predominantly in the construction sector, but in a small number of revenue cases as well, around kind of apprenticeship creation and development of small business and social enterprise as part of supply chains. So, as I said, there was a relatively strong picture in Manchester already in terms of kind of levels of local spend, but there was a degree of emphasis placed upon wanting to improve that. And we kind of supported the City Council through a series of activities to try and really maximise that benefit for the Manchester economy. And these are just some of the things that we've done. We felt there was a real important link between different service departments and procurement. So we set up a cross-departmental procurement working group so that the priorities, the activities of different departments could feed into the procurement process. And I think that the key link was between economic development and procurement in terms of kind of working collaboratively to maximise that benefit that was brought. We set up a network of suppliers, which is a relatively unique thing at the time. You often kind of contract a service. The supplier goes out, delivers it, does a nice job, you get some decent kind of outputs in terms of what the service provision is. But what's the wider benefit? What greater benefit does it bring in terms of kind of economic, social and environmental issues? So we set up this network of suppliers so that effectively Manchester City Council could highlight what their kind of key corporate priorities were to the supply chain, get the supply chain thinking differently, and really try and think about influencing the behaviour of that supply chain to deliver beyond the outputs of that particular service. We did some work with suppliers based in those areas of deprivation, again, about influencing, about cajoling those organisations to deliver wider benefit through service delivery. There's a great example of an organisation that's based in Gorton, again one of the most deprived areas in the city, who recently secured a £5 million contract with the council, but at that stage they weren't recruiting anyone locally, they didn't have any suppliers that were based in Manchester. They wanted to think through how they could not only deliver the service but also maximise that benefit. So they worked with neighbourhood employment brokers to support 10 people from a neighbourhood in Gorton into employment with their organisation. And that's about influence, it's about relationships with the supply chain. We did some work around apprenticeships, and the value of apprenticeships, and adopting social clauses in the procurement process, which is again a real way of kind of maximising benefit. And then the last thing which we've done, which is kind of ongoing, is around the development of an outcomes framework. It goes back to that point around, the end of the procurement process ending with the letting of the contract. I don't think that could be really the case anymore. We need our suppliers, as part of a kind of a whole place approach, to really continue to maximise benefit beyond the service delivery. So we set up a set of outcome indicators against which the performance of the supply chain is monitored in terms of economic, social and environmental considerations. In terms of the impact of all that, we've done the spend analysis over the last 4 years to try and understand the impact of those strategic activities and some of the wider influence and behaviour of the City Council. And we've seen an incremental kind of growth in the proportion of spend in the local economy. So starting off from that baseline of 51.5% in 2008 and 2009, we've seen growth to around about 65.3% in 2012-2013. And that's through developing better relationships with the potential supply chain, understanding who the suppliers are, embedding kind of corporate priorities into procurement activity as well. So we've seen that type of growth. We've also seen change in terms of spending areas of deprivation as well. So this is spent both by the authority, but also in terms of kind of the re-spend of the supply chain within those neighbourhoods. So we've seen an increase to around about 60% of the total spend in Manchester, with Manchester-based organisations being re-spent, being spent in neighbourhoods in the 10% most deprived nationally. I think the most interesting outcome of that work is the re-spend of the supply chain and the impact of the influence and behaviour that the Council's been undertaking. Previously, in 2008-2009, around about 25 pence in every pound was re-spent by suppliers back in the Manchester economy. Now the figure's about 47 pence in every pound. So we've seen a significant increase and change in the behaviour of the supply chain to think differently about Manchester and outcomes affecting the city. So just to conclude, I just wanted to give a few thoughts. I'm getting the nod. A few thoughts around how you can actually progress procurement for economic benefit. And these are some of the things that we've been working on with a number of authorities across the country over the last 3 or 4 years. One, I think you need to link your procurement activity to wider corporate priorities. I think one of the key things that Manchester have done is actually put at the outset of all their tender documentation, this is what our 3 key corporate priorities are. The supply chain will respond to that. They'll respond to that in their kind of tender responses, saying that, look, we'll create jobs or we'll develop apprenticeships as part of our activity. 2, I think it's really important that authorities engage through with communities and also with voluntary community sector organisations in the design of services. I think this is particularly important in terms of opening up the market to voluntary sector organisations through the notion of kind of co-production. Procurement strategy, I think it's important that procurement strategy has a common narrative, so it links both that kind of cost and quality emphasis, but also the wider maximisation of benefit. Portals is an interesting one. Lots of public sector bodies have set up procurement portals. I think there's a real challenge here around kind of subcontracting. We've got an understanding of what contract opportunities are available in the public sector, but when it comes to subcontracting and small business and social enterprise in particular, we need particular portals that kind of highlight to potential organisations what subcontracting opportunities are available to enable that kind of virtuous circle of local economic benefit to be realised. I think in terms of opening up the market, there's stuff around kind of streamlining PPQ and ITT documentation to make it more straightforward for small business in particular to bid procurement opportunities. It's always the kind of biggest bugbear of small enterprises, the bureaucracy that they have to go through. Just a couple more things. I think understanding the local business base is really important in terms of procurement, so understanding who your potential suppliers are, what services they could potentially deliver, what support and capacity they need to engage in the procurement process. And then just finally around kind of spend analysis and outcomes monitoring and conscious of time, that it's really important to kind of continuously monitor where spend is going and what impact it's having on place. So Procurement is really important, I think, for 5 reasons. One, area-based initiatives have gone, they're not going to come back, so we've seen the end of neighbourhood renewal and particular neighbourhood programmes. Procurement could be the fill-up, I think, to some of that loss of resource through kind of creating jobs and maximising the benefit of procurement. Procurement's a key part of this notion of places operating as a system, so collaborations and relationships between the public, the commercial and the social sector. Local authorities are the drivers of public procurement activity in the wider public sector. I think we continue to face real massive challenges here in the UK around kind of unemployment, worklessness, skills development and business sustainability. So procurement is a way of addressing some of those challenges. I think finally, mainstream tools need to be used more effectively. So local authorities and public sector bodies need to use the mechanisms that they already have at their disposal a lot more effectively. So that includes procurement, it includes co-production, it includes community budgets, and it includes kind of local governance and strategy making, so that there really is kind of a maximisation of benefit through that activity. So I've rattled a bit. Thank you.